All right, so I think it's probably safe to get started. Thank you for having me here. I'll give you a brief introduction in a minute. The purpose of this presentation is to talk a bit about post-secondary planning and the post-secondary process, specifically how it relates to OutCan families. And I'm here on behalf of MFS here in Canada. I'm based in Ottawa. So a lot of changes for us with the MFS education team. Many of you may know us as being related or tied to SEM. We're no longer tied to SEM. SEM has a completely separate education or guidance team. So currently there's three of us, Andrea, myself, and Jeremy. Andrea is our program, our senior manager. Jeremy is our program or project coordinator. Andrea and I are both high school guidance counselors. Andrea's been with MFS since about 2014, and I started just this past February. Up until that point, I was a guidance counselor in the public system here in Ottawa. And our role will be, as we move forward, will be to help support families, in particular with transitioning back to Canada and also, I think, in transitions within Canada. So certainly this post-secondary transition is something that will play a significant role in, I think. Throughout the presentation, I'll keep bringing up the CFMWS website. A lot of the information that I'll share with you and the minutia of it will be available on the website. It's currently CAF Connection, but we'll be switching over to a new website sometime a little later in October. And I will be your contact person. So if you have questions about post-secondary pathway planning, whether it be grade 11 students looking to start the process, grade 12 students who are currently in the process, I would be your point of contact at CFMWS. My experience as a guidance counselor was lasted in the public system, lasted for about 6-7 years. I was full-time guidance and student success for a total of about 10 years in an Ottawa high school. But I'm also a parent of 2 kids who have gone through the process. I have a student who went very kind of traditional into university, graduated, no problem, 4 years graduated, and I have another child who had a variety of different stops along the way. So I'll talk about some of those today, and not only as a guidance counselor, but as a parent, I've had the chance to experience that. So today we're going to talk about a variety of things or a variety of questions or topics that would be relevant to young people who are getting to the end of high school or in their senior years in high school. The tone of the presentation will be more a conversation with the students themselves. I feel that this sort of stage of life is an important transition one. It's not only exciting to be looking at new opportunities and new social environments, new kind of lifestyle. Post-secondary is a very different lifestyle than what students have been used to, but it's also a transition stage, a significant one in families. Your kids are moving into becoming adults, and as when they turn 18, they're kind of legally responsible for a lot of things that they haven't been before. And this is a part of that transition because a lot of this process sits on them. It's their responsibility. There's not anything that as a parent you can do to impact certain parts of this. So it is a significant transition. Having said that, parents and guardians do play an important role in the process around supporting their kids with decision making, having those financial conversations, helping support them, meeting deadlines, reminding them of deadlines. But at the end of the day, it's the student that is ultimately responsible for following through with the day-to-day things that need to happen to ensure that this goes smoothly. So it's an exciting time. but it's also could be unnerving at times. And that's why we're here to support. So if things come up, or there are questions or concerns or things people aren't sure about, then we want to make sure that you're getting your answers. So this is the ultimately, as a guidance counselor, the question that we would hear all the time. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? Because that seems to be the narrative around these kinds of transitions. And the thing I like to remind young people is that you're not deciding what you're doing with the rest of your life. You're deciding what you think you want to do next. And as we'll see throughout the presentation, there are all sorts of different entry points to go from one decision to another in terms of an educational and career pathway. But just shared a list of a few of the different options that youth might be looking at as they finish their high school or secondary experience. Some are prepared to enter the workforce right out of high school. That doesn't mean that they won't return to education, but that is a pathway for a number of kids. And then there's a variety of educational options, ranging from university, college, going into trades training, all sorts of different options. And you can see them presented there. Some of them are what we would consider university pathway, some are college pathway options. So I think most people would fall under two different categories. Some young people have a very, very good sense of what they want to do. So whether that be because of their life experience or the people that they've interacted with through school or in their personal lives, or whether that's like an educator that they felt connected to and learned a lot from, and were motivated to move in a particular direction. For those people, then the process is a little bit simpler, and we'll kind of get to where they would start in a minute. Having said that, some people don't have a great idea of where they want to go. And that's fine, that's okay. It's not an issue if you don't know what you want to do just yet. You just have a little bit more work to do. So one of the things that I would recommend for youth that are in that position is to start by talking to the people around them. Talk to your school counselor, talk to your teachers. You should be able to access interest surveys through your school. There are online ones that you can do for free, but most schools would be able to provide that kind of career counseling interest survey to start getting an idea of what career pathways might best suit your interests, personality style, those sorts of things. And then you can start doing some research around educational pathways. What are the things that are important for you in a job? What kind of lifestyle do you want to have? How big a role does the salary play in your decision? You're looking to get into an industry that has lots of growth options, or traveling, those kinds of things. And then obviously talking to family and friends, I think is important as well, to help you narrow down on at least a kind of a sector or a sort of industry or a kind of job category you think you'd want to move towards. So then, like, I think I know what I want to do. So what do I do next? If your choice is to not pursue post-secondary education and you want to enter directly into the workforce or into another career directly, there are options. I'd recommend that if you're going to be coming back to Canada after you finish school, then starting with provincial employment sites. Government of Canada, Canada.ca has a job database. You can start doing a little bit of job hunting in those places. Most larger communities have youth employment programs, often through community centers. They'll provide some kind of 6, 8, 12-week program that youth can, but usually between 16 and 25 can access, where they would they do resume writing, job interview skills. They would there might be an actual like a paid placement where you could transition into a job. Lots of options. So if that's something you're looking to do, if you're not ready to continue a school or don't think you want to continue a school, then that's a great place to start. Joining the military is an option for some youth, and it's obviously a popular conversation amongst military circles at the moment. Many of you would know better than I what the process would be, because your families are immersed in it. But contacting a recruiting officer would be a good place to start. Some kids want to continue their education, but they're not ready just yet. And especially being 17, 18, might not be sure what you want to do. It's a big financial commitment to go to a post-secondary institution. And so a lot of young people will choose to take a gap year. That was the path that my daughter took. She wasn't ready. She was like many kids. I think we view a gap year sometimes as that the student's not capable of going to university. That's generally not the case. A gap year is typically for kids who maybe don't know exactly what they want to do, not sure what they want to do, whether they want to go away, stay at home. They're not prepared to commit to something starting like right now, starting November, kind of December of their grade 12 year. And so maybe having a gap year, working, saving some money, and then taking some time to contemplate options and figure out what they want to do next is the best approach. Again, my daughter did that. I think the key though is that you need to have a plan. That you don't want to go into a gap year just saying, no, I'm going to take the year off and I'm going to get a job. Okay, well then you need to get a job if that's your plan, or start doing some research now around gap year programs. So there's all sorts of great gap year programs. There'll be some resources available on the MFS site, which I'll show you in a minute, where you can access volunteer work. There's some really, really good ones that you apply to. There's one here in Ottawa, I think it's called Discover Year. They take 40 to 60 students. It involves some volunteer work. It involves paid work. It involves a bunch of mentorship. You get exposure to a variety of different industries. So like maybe something like that that's formalized is a good option for some students. For other students, working, saving some money, and feeling like they have that sort of small little nest egg in the bank before they start school. That's what my daughter did. She worked and she's managed to get through now 6 years of post-secondary education with basically about the same amount of money in the bank. So for a lot of kids, it gives them that financial stability as well. So now if you think, okay, I want to go to school, there's a bunch of jargon you need to be familiar with. And you'll see these. One of the things that I like to talk about, I'm from a generation where when I went through high school and into post-secondary, the landscape for colleges and university was very different than it is now. The colleges and universities in many ways are interchangeable. A lot of, as we see on the slide, a lot of colleges and universities offer joint degrees where students will spend part of their degree in a college, part of it in a university. And then the transition between colleges and universities is more common than I think it's ever been. And that goes both directions. So I read a stat not too long ago that somewhere between 12 and 15% of college students have university degrees. So it's not just students going to college and then going to university to get a degree. It's students coming the other way, getting a degree and then going back to college to get a bit more specific directed job training. So you'll see a variety of programs from a 1-year program, 2-year program, 3-year program are kind of what fairly typical of what you would see in a college environment. So the certificate, diploma, advanced diploma. A degree is what we would more conventionally associate with a university. So those are typically 4-year programs. You can do a 3-year undergrad degree, but those are kind of a fading option in most universities. They tend to go to 4-year degrees. And then you'll also see some other terminology around a concurrent or a consecutive program. If anybody wants to be a teacher, you'll see that language. You can do your B.Ed in a concurrent way or a consecutive way. And then also the thing you'll hear in the information you come across is the idea of an articulation. And this is a formal agreement between a college and a university where students can apply to a university out of college and transfer their credits towards their university degree. So sometimes it's a 1-for-2, so you'll get 1 year of university credit for your 2-year college degree, for example. You can apply into university sometimes right after the first year of your college program. Say you're doing a 2-year diploma, you could apply into university. They might not give you any credits though. And some schools will give you a 2-for-2. So that means if you do 2 years of college, you'll essentially enter into a certain program in 3rd year, and that's called an articulation. So my daughter did that. She went to college first and then articulated into a university program, and it actually worked out great for her because that articulation agreement was with a university out in BC that she wouldn't have ever found otherwise, I don't think. So it actually opened up a really interesting opportunity. So it is an option for a lot of students that don't feel like they really know exactly what they want to do. They choose to go to college, do a diploma, get some really real hands-on directed training, career sort of training, and then decide, oh, there's a benefit to going to university from there, and then they'll choose to articulate. Sometimes those articulation agreements are very specific. Sometimes they're very general, meaning you have a diploma, you can apply into these undergrad programs, and they'll give you a whole variety. So something to keep in mind. So once you've decided, okay, this is what I think I want to do, the next step of deciding where to apply seems to be a lot more complicated for families that are outcan, because you're not necessarily located in a particular community. When families are here in Canada, they tend to be grounded in a specific community. A big part of the conversation for those families tends to be, how far away from home do you want to be? How often do you want to come home? I'm here in Ottawa. We have 2 excellent universities here in Ottawa. So for those families, the conversation often is just, are you going to go to Ottawa, U or Carleton? Are you going to go to Kingston and go to Queens? It's only 2 hours away. But when you're not grounded in a particular community, it makes it a little bit more difficult. Some of you may have extended family here, or you may know that you're coming back to a particular community, so that might influence your decision making in terms of where you want to go. But I think for everybody, these topics that are on the screen here are all pretty important and things to be thinking about. Because you want to end up in a school and in a community that you're comfortable in, that it feels a bit like home, and that you're going to want to spend 4 or more years there. It's not uncommon for students to stay, especially as they get into 3rd and 4th year, to stay and work in the communities that they're going into school in. So you really want to be in somewhere that's going to give you the opportunities you want and that you're comfortable with. So some of the things that you want to think about: do you want to be in a big city or a small city? Are you a big city person or a small city person? My son went to U of T, and my daughter started college in Pembroke. Very different places. If you go to U of T, you got to love being in a big city because you are in the middle of the city. The campus is right in the middle of downtown Toronto. If that's not the kind of place you want to go, then maybe you want to be in a smaller city. Maybe you go to Kingston or Guelph or Kamloops or Halifax or somewhere else. Do you want to be in a big school or a small school? So the universities, for example, in the Atlantic provinces might have 8,000 students. Western might have 70 or 80,000 undergrads. So that's a very different size of a population. And then that translates into class size, connection to your professors. The culture is very different. So you want to think about that. What suits you more? Climate. Do you want to be in Winnipeg or do you want to be in Vancouver, right? Those are very different. So you want to think of those things. You want to consider language and bilingual options. There are Francophone universities and there are bilingual universities. There are a couple of bilingual universities in Ontario, Ottawa U being one of them, where you can study in French or English. And what about the surrounding environment? Like, do you want to be in the prairies or do you want to be in the mountains or do you want to be on the ocean? All that stuff is important. And maybe for CAF families, the access to transportation and just the access from the community is important, especially if the rest of the family is still out CAN and your kids want to be able to travel back and forth. Having some easier access and transportation might be part of the consideration. And like I mentioned, proximity to family or extended family. And you might want to look at cost because tuition varies from institution to institution. It can be significantly different. So it might be worth looking at. Once you've considered these things, it starts to narrow your focus a little bit. And then you can decide where you want to focus your energy. So this map is a map of universities and colleges across the country. So there's a lot of them. In Ontario alone, there's like 23 universities. It's by far the most of all the provinces, but there's a lot of options. So let's just, I'm going to click on this link and open up this map. And going to zoom out a bit. So the nice thing about the map here is that it allows you to focus in on a particular part of the country. Let's go out here to Atlantic Canada and see the universities and where they are. You can just click on them, get a bit of information about the university, start linking to their websites, checking them out. If you've been able to narrow down to a particular region that you would think you might want to end up in, perhaps your family has spent much of their time on the coasts, perhaps you're very comfortable with Atlantic Canada, now you've narrowed your options significantly. If you're pretty sure you want to be in the Halifax area, well, you're looking at those schools. If you want to stay in that particular area. So I think it's a good tool because it gives you at least a starting point and starting to look at specific schools and programs. The international narrative around Canadian universities is very limited to a small number of schools, the ones that have a big international footprint. And that's intentional on their part. Their marketing is focused to draw in international students. So you would hear those small number of schools, probably like U of T, McGill, UBC. They do a lot of marketing overseas to try and attract international students. So the narrative around those in international communities would be very different than a lot of other smaller universities or universities that aren't doing the same amount of marketing. All to say that there's a lot of very good colleges and universities in Ontario or in Canada, and they're spread throughout the country. So I think it's worth taking a look at all the options in the particular parts of the country you think you might want to end up settling in for your beginning your post-secondary studies. Okay, back to that. Okay, so once you kind of get an idea of what you want to do and maybe where you want to be, now you can start researching those schools and learning about the programs. You might know you want to go into engineering, for example. Maybe you know that already. You think you want to go into engineering. Maybe you hadn't decided where you want to be. Maybe now you're starting to focus in on that and focus in on particular schools and starting to learn a little bit about the programs. Maybe you've decided you want to do a college program, or you think you want to pursue a trade and you think you want to do a college program before you launch into the trade. Perfect. Now you need to start looking at specific schools. So it's easier in some places than others. Ontario, BC, Alberta have databases. Where you can start their schools. In Ontario, there's a large one, Ontario Universities Info, that looks specifically at Ontario universities, and you can access information about any program in any university in the province, and likewise at the colleges, Ontario colleges, you can access information about any college program. I'm just going to quickly click on this to give you a look at it. It's the one I'm most familiar with, being based here in Ontario. The nice thing about it is it's got a search engine where you can just click programs, put your area of interest, keyword, whatever it happens to be. And then if you want to narrow it down to particular schools, you can do that. And you'll find out information about all the programs that fall under your search. So once I click on these, I can then find out about the program. This grade range is the one that you'll want to keep an eye on, and then the specific course requirements. Now that wouldn't apply to you. You would be applying with an international diploma. You might have an American diploma. You might be coming from an IB program, perhaps. So you're going to have to do a little bit more work around looking at admissions. So here is the IB admissions for the school. But the nice thing about this is you can access or link directly to any university website and then go to admissions and find out what your entrance requirements would be. For example, if you're coming from a US curriculum school and you wanted to access this program, you go to the school website, go to admissions, put in the program you want, you have a US diploma, and they would tell you exactly what you would need. So I like the databases. BC has a similar one. Theirs is good because it's got a nice planning tool on it. Alberta has one. The AARAO is the Atlantic Universities and Colleges. So on there, you can see all the universities and colleges on the East Coast. If you're narrowing in on schools outside of those areas, then you need to go to the individual websites for the schools and check out information about admissions. If at any point you have specific questions about the schools, or you can't find the information you need, then contact admissions at those schools. Feel free to email us as well, or email me, and I'll provide what information I can. But the admissions officers at the school are happy to support you. They want you to come there, so they'll help you out. So then a couple of other things you want to consider. So you might be applying to 3 or 4 schools, 5 or 6 schools. And one of the things that I think is important to remember at this stage is to not overthink it too much, because you're only applying to the schools. You're not deciding about which school you're going to go to. So throughout this process, you've got a lot of time to make your final decision. You're just trying to narrow down on what school you think is best for you. And here's some other things you might want to take a look at or consider. One of the big ones on here is experiential learning or co-op. Again, in my experience is more in Ontario, and it's become one of the largest funding metrics for colleges. Historically, it's been a big part of their focus is experiential learning, but for universities as well. So you're going to see a ton of conversation around co-op options for co-op. There's different entrance averages for a co-op program and a non-co-op program. And it's something worth considering. Is this super important to you? And if it is, then you want to learn more about the co-op programs. If you do co-op, it's not unusual that you're now looking at upwards of a 5-year program. So you're paying more to go to school because you're adding more time, but you're also getting paid for your co-op. What are the networking opportunities? Is the co-op just in your 5th year or your 4th year, or do you do a rotation between co-op and school? You'll want to look at that information, and it will be there for all the different co-op programs. And then the other thing you want to look at is learning a bit more about the community. I know it's hard for families who are outcan to actually go visit the schools. So you want to draw on the resources that you can access. The universities and colleges have all put a lot of time over the last few years into developing virtual tours. A lot of the schools have programs where you can connect with a current student that's in the faculty that you're interested in. You can do a meet with them. If you're in Canada and you're able to do a school visit, you can sometimes shadow them for a day, stuff like that. And then also to learn more about the communities, maybe do a virtual tour of their tourism site. That might help give a sense of the community and help you narrow down your schools. And then you got to apply. Okay, so this is the crux of the process, I think, for most people. We have provided on the CFMWS on our site, if it pops up here, put the link, there we go. So this is the current website. It will be changing. And on our educational tools page, we have information about applying to post-secondary, both for colleges and for universities. And they're both very similar, but it's kind of a step-by-step description of what you have to do and kind of when. So we encourage families to access this. It'll be on the new website when it's available, and we update these as we need. So I won't go into the step-by-step process of it right now because that's there, but I'm available to answer questions today, or you can send me an email. If you're applying into Canada, some provinces will use a provincial application site. So in Canada, in Ontario, it's UAC you would use. And again, the description of what you have to do is all on that handout. Alberta and BC use some version of a central application center. Otherwise, you're typically going to apply directly to the school, and that will be clear from the admissions section of the school website. Remembering though that you are a domestic student, it's important for you to keep in mind, and that you perhaps follow up with the individual schools to ensure they know that you are domestic student, but you'll be using some kind of international transcript. Okay, and they'll be able to give you a lot of information about what you have to do, timelines, all the rest of it. If you're looking to apply to US schools, especially, then there are a couple options. A lot of schools in the US will use Common Application. So that's a central application center. But keep in mind that US schools will often use more than just marks. In Canada, most of your acceptance will be based on your grades. But if you're applying to a US school, SATs, ACT scores, entrance essays, etc., might be a more prominent part of the process. If you're applying from, obviously you're applying from OutCan, when you apply to a Canadian university, you'll see some information about SATs, ACTs. They're not required though, and typically they're not required. So if you have particular questions about that, again, reach out to me and we can talk about that. And then if you're looking at other international schools, I would encourage you to reach out to your academic supports that you have in your school that you're currently located in, because the processes are quite a bit different from place to place. Remembering, if you're not coming back to Canada and you're going to a US or an international school, to take a careful look at what the fees would be, because they'd be significantly different. There. So when you're applying in the process, a couple things we want to remind students of, and for the students, this is key because they're the only ones that can do this. They're applying with their own email address. The process starts the minute you apply, and it essentially ends when you show up at school. So that's starting October, November, all the way in through next August. And there'll be communication and things to do from the school, things you need to do throughout the process. So we encourage students when they're applying to use an email address that's not linked to their current school. So if you're in a school right now, you use your Scholastic email as the contact point, and then you finish in June, say, and that email is deactivated, you're no longer getting the communication from the school. So make sure you're using an email that is your personal email that you can access all the time. And if you have a personal email address that isn't one that you would want a professional institution seeing, then change it. Find a very generic email address, make sure you have that account, you check it all the time, and specifically, at least initially, that you're checking your spam folder all the time, because we find sometimes the communications from post-secondary institutions jump right into the spam folder and then kids miss stuff. Whatever you get back from them, read it carefully. Note the timelines. What do you have to do? When do you have to do it? Some programs have additional requirements. Like I mentioned for you guys, it might be an SAT or a ACT. You might have a supplementary application. I know that Queen's requires them for certain programs. You might have an audition or a portfolio to submit. So my son was a musician, so he had to plan and do auditions. A lot of them you can do virtually now and submit your virtual auditions, but you want to make sure you meet the timelines. So I would recommend to students you start some kind of file, whether it be a spreadsheet, whatever works for you, a calendar that's dedicated to this process, and that you're making sure you're setting notifications, tracking deadlines, submitting well in advance. If you have to get letters of reference from referees at your school, whatever it happens to be, that you plan those well in advance. It's just really, really, really important that you're on top of the timelines, because if you miss them, you might find there's no recourse. So, and this is the responsibility of the students to do this, but it's also obviously a place where parents and guardians can help out. The other thing that we like to remind students is that just because you've applied and even perhaps gotten an offer, your work isn't done, because offers have conditions, and if you don't meet conditions, you lose your offer. They're pretty strict about it. And you also might note that at your school that you've applied to, that your entrance scholarship can fluctuate based on what your final grades are. Your admissions to post-secondary doesn't actually become final until July. They'll look at final submitted marks, and that's when the quote unquote official decision is made. So you need to keep working and keeping the marks up, meeting your conditions, and doing the best that you can. Right. So yeah, losing conditions you don't want to do, and make sure you meet those supplemental requirements. The conditions would typically be A, you have to graduate, B, you have to complete the compulsory courses with the mark that's required, and probably there's a minimum average that you have to maintain. Okay, so if you have any questions about it when you get the communications from the schools, definitely loop back to admissions and clarify it. Make sure you know exactly what you have to do. Okay. You also have to accept an offer. We see this occasionally where students get an offer and they think, oh, okay, I'm in, it's good. Well, no, you have to accept it. And there'll be a timeline for that, but it could be as late as the end of May, depending on the school. If you've decided on a school and you know that's exactly where you want to go and you accept an offer, then it's sort of good form to decline the other offers, because otherwise that offer will sit there and it'll stale date at the end of May, for example, and at that point they'll offer it to another student. So it would be nicer for that other student to be able to get that offer a little bit earlier in the process. And for a lot of the students who are coming out, Cam, we encourage you to take a look at the AP and IB policies for your school. So if you're doing AP, especially a lot of students in American curriculum schools, we encourage them to do AP. You'll want to then take a look at the procedure for submitting your AP marks if you're looking for advanced placement. If you have specific questions about that, again, please loop back to us and we can talk to you a bit more about that. Every year, there are some students that apply and don't get an offer. And that's not the end of the world. There's things we can do, but I think a lot of the time that can be avoided with good planning. And by that, we mean be realistic. When I showed you that database earlier, we looked at the entrance average. If the entrance average for McGill says 92 for engineering and your marks are 78, well, you're not going to get into McGill engineering. You can apply, but you need to have parallel plans. If you'd really like to go to McGill engineering, great, apply, but make sure you have some parallel options. So maybe you're applying to an engineering program in another university that has an entrance average that's a little bit lower. Sometimes those entrance averages for certain programs at certain schools are incredibly high. And often that's because they're drawing from a large international population. So you might be able to find a program at a smaller school that's equally as good, but they're not drawing as many international students. The entrance averages aren't quite as inflated, and you have a better chance of getting in. So make sure that you're being realistic about where you're applying and what you're applying to, that it fits your profile, your interest, and your marks. Your families and CAF families live a lifestyle that presents a variety of challenges. So you'll also want to look at whether there's an option for the schools that you're applying to submit a statement of experience. So that might be a essay you submit that explains the different challenges that you've had that might have influenced your mark. So that's why you got a 78 instead of an 80, and they might consider that in their admissions process. Ottawa U does that. They have that process, and there are other schools that do. The other thing you want to keep in mind is that when you're doing your research, you want to look at the policies on alternate offers. So if I apply to a very specific biotech program, the school might have an alternate offer, meaning that if I don't get into biotech, they'll give me a place in biology. So you might still get in. It might not be the specific program you want. So take a look at that. And if you didn't get in, you didn't get an offer at all, and you really want to go to a particular school, then I would recommend you loop back to admissions and find out what alternative options there are, because generally there's always programs that have openings left in them. It's just some of the specific high demand ones might not. You might want to consider going back and upgrading. You might want to consider a bridging program. So Carleton University, for example, has something called enriched support, where it's kind of like you do 2 to 3 university credits, you get mentoring and support, and then after your year in enriched support, you apply directly into a degree program, and those credits that you've completed you carry forward with you. You might want to look at doing that college to university route and considering articulation agreement, lots of open enrollment programs in colleges. And then lastly, if you might want to really consider whether the plan that you started on is what you really want to do. But in most cases, lots of these other options pan out, and that's a reasonable next step. And lots of students get to where they want to go in the end using these alternative plans. And then lastly, really quickly, I want to talk about paying for it, because this is is a big conversation. University can be quite expensive. Both of my kids were away for university, so it is a significant investment, but lots of ways to finance it. Something I can't really speak to, but I encourage members to follow up on is to reach out to the URS, the education administrator, or to the SEM. They'll probably direct you ultimately maybe to the SEM guidance people to find out about educational allowances available to CAF members. There might be ability to access resources there. And then the other one is scholarships. There's tons and tons and tons of scholarships. There are millions of dollars a year of scholarships that go unclaimed in Canada because people don't bother applying to them. So on our website there, as I'm going to skip over it right now because I'm definitely over my time, but you'll find on the CAF Connection site, soon to be CFMWS, a scholarship link where there's a document that gives you a bunch of scholarships that you can start researching into. Some of them are specific to CAF members, some of them are not. Most of them have kind of later timelines, so the spring for submission, but some of them are fall submission deadlines, so worth looking at. And then the other things that are awesome places to start are these databases, things like ScholarTree, Scholarships Canada. These are also on the document, the scholarship document on our website. But these are databases, and they both work very much the same way, where you create an account. They tend to be free, and then you create a profile, and then the application pushes out scholarships that fit your profile. So you can see just here on Scholarships Canada, there's a bunch of specific categories. What seems to be the problem for a lot of students, or what my experience, some of the scholarships aren't big. They might be $500 or $400, and that takes maybe an hour to apply to them. So they don't see it as worthwhile taking that time for a few bucks. But if you are able to get, 10 scholarships of $500, that's a significant amount of money. Like now you're looking at, 2/3 of your, if not more, depending on where you go, of your tuition. So to simplify that process a little bit, I would encourage students to start building a profile. So sit down, take a few minutes, start documenting all the different accomplishments you've had, things that are unique about you, your interest areas, your academic profile, and just putting it in a document. And then when you start filling out scholarship applications, you already have all the information there. It's a question of just bringing it over, editing a bit, tailoring it to the specific scholarship, and then submitting it. So it simplifies the process instead of doing it over and over again from scratch. Some schools offer, many schools offer entrance scholarships based generally purely on your marks, but they also might have scholarships that you can apply to. Those would be more common in upper years, but you may be able to access some scholarships from your specific school once you accept an offer when you're entering first year. And then also look at provincial grants and loans, because a lot of the families are obviously coming out there might be some restrictions on grants and loans that you can accept or apply for. For example, in Ontario, it would be OSAP, but it's absolutely worth reaching out to them or going to the website and finding out. But certainly once you start in a school, especially if you stay in the community, you're eligible to access those and apply to grants and loans because you would be a resident at that point. And then, yeah, so that's it. I know I threw out a lot of stuff there, and I probably went longer than Amanda wanted me to, but I like to talk. Okay, so if there's any questions, I'll just stop sharing and we'll go there.